At the beginning of this module, I knew I wanted to create a plot to my film that would be an in-depth, complex view into the human condition, how love and lust could be explored on screen through a psychological lens. When we were tasked with creating a three-hander, I started to research on love triangles, keeping in with the overall theme of the project. I went down the psychological findings of Steinberg's triangular theory of love in order to add depth, heighten and develop characters' emotional journey. Intimacy, passion and commitment are the bedrock of a relationship, according to Steinberg, and they are measured against a relationship satisfaction scale, in which the findings reveal how content the person is within their own relationship. I challenged myself to apply this scale during the first of the character development process. How the three characters are at different ends of the relationship satisfaction scale would impact the script and the visuals of the performance. I found this to be very fruitful at advancing the film's development. It allowed me, as a writer, to consider the characters' objectives, obstacles, and more carefully when mapping the characters' through line. Upon reflection, it aided in dialogue creation as well.
I've learned a lot about what goes into script writing and how much actually goes into script writing. And the fact that we haven't had that a large amount of time has really made me choose elements of the story that I really want to focus on and that I think are worth expanding on. So yeah, I've learned how to kill my babies basically and decide which works and which I think doesn't work.
Have you encountered any challenges within the first 2 weeks?
I think in terms of the script itself, there's some challenges in that a lot of it is cutting out exposition, I think, because when I write, I paint pictures and I'm very much like a creative writer when I write my first draft of any script, so a lot of that is cutting that back down and seeing if I can show things rather than tell things a lot of the time. So deciding which actually develops a plot and which just hinders it further is one of the big challenges for me when I write. I've volunteered myself to be in charge of costume, so that involves getting everyone's costume ready, making sure everyone knows what they're going to wear, when they're going to wear it. I guess my next step is just to understand what everyone's creative ambitions are for their scene and how I can best support that through costume.
When choosing our roles for the production side, I knew I wanted to do costume. It's something that always really interested me for many years now, about how we can paint visual images and storytelling on screen rather than just the dialogue. So when I found out I was doing costume, I dove straight into doing research on it. I did some research into Edith Head, who is a multi-award winning American costume designer, and I found a quote that really inspired me and helped me to choose different costumes for the characters. A costume designer is a cross between magic and camouflage. We create the illusion of changing the actors into what they are not. At the very beginning, we knew we wanted a coherent look because all the scenes were happening in the same world, so we needed to make sure the colour scheme was quite similar throughout all the pieces and nothing was too jarring and stood out. We did this by creating mood boards on Pinterest about different colour schemes we liked. Then we just went into some shops to look for some visual stimuli which we thought would best represent this. In terms of how I adapted myself throughout the process, I feel like costumes really helped me to forward plan a lot of things that needed to be ordered. We needed to take into consideration the posting time, we needed to consider what people had in their wardrobe, and we needed to adapt around the shooting schedule. We needed to prioritise a shoot that was coming up in 2 days' time versus one that had 2 weeks yet to film.
The only thing is budget at the minute. We're kind of playing around and kind of struggling with that a bit, because for like costumes that we need that we don't have in the costume store, we need to go out and like buy them on Amazon and source different materials. But yeah, we're getting there.
I knew the acting exercises that I chose needed to be quite quick and would help me get into my character zone quite quickly, because we were one of the first groups to film. We didn't have the luxury of 2 weeks to get into our character research. Our days were often very long and it was filled with lots of cast and extras and crew, so it really helped me to get rid of any external distractions and focus on my character. and I made sure that the exercises that I chose are versatile enough to help me in all different types of environment, be it on a rooftop or in a crowded little living room.
I think the biggest challenge was on Tuesday we dived into the really big 5-page meaty scene, so that was the most challenging, going from not filming anything to filming the big bulk of it. But then again, you shoot out of order in the real industry, so it's something that it was good to get experience with. I focus a lot on Uwe Hagen. The main one I did was, I did a lot on inner monologue work, because I think with my character there's a lot that she doesn't say and there's a lot in between the lines, especially working on a 3-hander. I think you need to have inner monologue because there's twice as more room like where you're not speaking, so you need to have that internal monologue, like so you're not dead behind the eyes. I did a lot on fear work as well. There's a chapter in her book where she talks about how to gain like realistic fear using like your own life experiences. So like I wrote out a list of like, I'm scared that blank will happen, and there was a big list, and I basically chose one of them, and in that moment where Anna realises that she's only got 2 weeks left to live, I used that example for my real life and gave it like an instant kind of like aid in my performance. But I think that was because I hadn't really tried that technique before, and it was a good technique, but it was quite emotionally draining doing that take after take after take.
One of the most vital and somewhat obvious aspects of screen acting I found is knowing what type of shot you're doing. While this might seem a somewhat obvious aspect, it is utterly integral to an actor's performance. If it is not communicated, it can often lead to the actor being unsure of the level of emotional portrayal in a take. For example, in a close-up, an actor will have a stronger connection to the audience, being the camera, versus a wide establishing shot. In addition, an awareness of movement is also needed for continuity purpose for the actor to remember. It is imperative to keep an open dialogue between yourself and the director of photography. Upon reflection, by doing this before take, it made me more comfortable in my performance and made me less anxious of the camera, aiding me in having some autonomy over my performance. Psychologically as well, keeping in check with making sure you pace your emotions in your performance, so when you get to your close-up, you're not already destroyed emotionally. I've learned that to make an effective screen performance, you need to have an awareness of not just your acting, but also how the people behind the camera have the knowledge to enhance your performance. In addition to this, location is another aspect I realised was important when taking into consideration an actor's performance. Unlike theatre, screen acting, you turn up to a set never having acted in that location before. This process has taught me to become fluid in my acting, never setting anything in stone other than my blocking when was marked in, but to view my process as an ever-changing, ebbing and flowing creation. As often on set, things can change at a moment's notice. Going to a new location to film from a rehearsal room, I found nerve-wracking at first, but understanding that the fear I was feeling was wasted energy, I shifted my attention to my acting exercise, and this helped me to achieve a more effective screen performance. One of the main challenges I faced in the production process was the script writing element, especially working in the parameters of a very tight time frame. We ran into some problems with adding a third character in, evenly distributing dialogue, whilst creating a good character arc and story. I discovered that unfortunately the mantra of "a little break can give you a fresh eye later" was a luxury that we could not afford. Whilst it did not massively hinder our script writing ability, having more time would have been more beneficial in letting the piece breathe for later evaluation on the quality of product we were producing. Another element that was challenging was sourcing the costumes. Again, with the problem with the script writing process, time frame was a factor that we had to consider, and also the lack of a set budget made organising costumes quite difficult. This is overcome by adjusting the colour palette, going from a neon colour palette to an earthy colour palette. We also relied on the cast to see what they had in their own wardrobe, as well as hiring out pieces from the lippet department. Upon reflection, the adventurous first choice of a neon colour palette and changing it to an earthy colour palette was wise. As doing my research into colour and how that showed on TV and film, colour is best used subconsciously, so if your combinations are too bold, distracting, you might need to reconsider your choices. I think it was a lot more beneficial to change this colour palette because earthy tones are a lot more accessible to a lot of the cast than what a neon palette would have been. Keeping all this information logged on a spreadsheet, doing weekly tasks, filling it out, made the task of managing wardrobe considerably easier. The most effective method to achieve the production outcome for making a coherent costume and makeup look was to have a weekly catch-up with the creative team to share any ideas or feedback. Having time independently to research costume, then feeding back to a team as a whole, was very beneficial. It meant any issues or suggestions we had, we could work through as a team, and making sure our overall artistic goal for the piece was maintained intact, as a collective. For example, colour palette for costume. Laura and I, during our first meeting, came up with neon colours for the makeup and costume. After discussion of availability, we opted for earthy tones, which in hindsight made it easier to source. These weekly updates made it easier to achieve personal department goals quicker.